I used to sit by the window in the corner of the living room, the one that caught the afternoon light just right, and watch the neighborhood children chase each other down the sidewalk. My hands would rest on the armrests of that old chair, the fabric worn thin from 60 years of use, and I'd think about how life moves so quickly that you don't realize what you've lost until the house falls silent and all you have left are memories and the ticking of a clock that sounds louder with each passing year. My name is Eleanor, and I am 83 years old. My body is frail now, my hands shake when I try to hold a teacup, and my eyes require thick glasses to see the world clearly, but my mind is as sharp as it ever was, perhaps sharper, because when you have nothing but time, you learn to pay attention to the smallest details. My son Robert came into my life 48 years ago, a squalling red-faced bundle who grew into a tall man with his father's serious eyes and my stubborn determination. When his father died 12 years ago, Robert became my anchor, my reason to wake up each morning and put on a clean dress, to brush my thin white hair and pretend that I was still the woman who once danced in the kitchen while making dinner. Robert married Amanda 7 years ago, and I tried so hard to love her. She was beautiful in that modern way, with her highlighted hair always perfectly styled and her clothes that looked expensive even though I knew Robert didn't make enough money to afford such things. She smiled at me during those first years, brought me flowers occasionally, called me Mom in that bright cheerful voice that never quite reached her eyes. But something changed about 2 years ago. The visits became more frequent but less warm. Amanda would come by while Robert was at work, always with that same smile, always asking how I was feeling, if I needed anything, if I was comfortable. She'd make me tea, sit with me on the sofa, talk about her life and her friends and her troubles, and I'd listen because that's what mothers do, even mothers-in-law. She'd tell me about the bills they were struggling with, the credit card debt, the dream of buying a bigger house in a better neighborhood. I'd nod sympathetically, understanding how hard young couples have it these days, how different the world is from when I was raising Robert in our modest 3-bedroom home that felt like a castle because it was filled with love. One afternoon, about 18 months ago, Amanda mentioned that she needed to borrow some money. Just a few $100s, she said, to cover an unexpected car repair. She looked at me with those wide, pleading eyes, and I thought of Robert, my dear son who worked so hard, and I went to my bedroom where I kept my purse and gave her $300 from my savings. She hugged me, called me the most generous mother-in-law in the world, promised she'd pay me back within a month. That month came and went. I never asked for the money back because I didn't want to seem petty, didn't want to create tension. Family is supposed to help each other, that's what I believed. Then she came back 6 weeks later with another story, another emergency. This time it was medical bills. Then it was a payment they'd forgotten. Then it was money for groceries because they'd had an unexpected expense. Each time, I opened my purse and counted out bills with my trembling fingers, and each time, Amanda would hug me and promise to repay me. But I began to notice something. My bank statements showed withdrawals I didn't remember making. Small amounts at first, $20 here, $40 there. I thought perhaps I was becoming forgetful, that my mind was slipping the way old minds do. I'd sit in my chair by the window and try to remember going to the bank, try to picture myself filling out a withdrawal slip, but the memories wouldn't come. Then one Tuesday morning, I found my checkbook on the kitchen counter instead of in the drawer where I always kept it. I picked it up with shaking hands and flipped through the register, and my heart began to pound in my chest like a frightened bird. There were checks written that I had no memory of writing. The signatures looked like mine but somehow weren't quite right, the loops slightly different, the pressure uneven. $1,500 over 6 months, taken in amounts small enough that I hadn't noticed the pattern. I sat down at the kitchen table and felt tears burning behind my eyes, not tears of sadness but of a deep terrible understanding that was beginning to take shape in my mind. I started keeping track after that. I bought a small notebook from the drugstore on one of my rare trips outside, and I hid it in the back of my dresser drawer beneath my winter sweaters. Every time Amanda visited, every time she went near my purse or asked to use the bathroom that was next to my bedroom, I would write down the date and check my wallet afterward. I counted the bills carefully, running my fingers over each one, memorizing the serial numbers. I felt like a spy in my own home, a detective investigating my own daughter-in-law, and the shame of it sat heavy in my chest. But I had to know. I had to be certain. The evidence accumulated slowly, painfully. $20 missing after Amanda made me tea and left my purse on the counter while she went to answer her phone. $50 gone after she helped me upstairs to get a sweater and my purse was left downstairs. $100 withdrawn from my account on a day when Amanda had borrowed my debit card to pick up groceries for me, claiming she'd forgotten her wallet. She always returned with the groceries and the card, always with receipts that showed reasonable amounts, but when I checked my bank statement online, something Robert had taught me to do, the withdrawals were always slightly more than the receipts showed. I confronted her on a grey October afternoon when the leaves were falling like tears outside my window. Robert was at work, and Amanda had come by supposedly to check on me. She'd made herself comfortable on my sofa, kicked off her expensive shoes, and was scrolling through her phone when I walked into the living room with my notebook. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold it, but my voice when I spoke was steady. I asked her about the money. I showed her my careful records, the dates and amounts, the pattern that had become unmistakable over time. I watched the color drain from her face, watched her mouth open and close like a fish gasping for air. Then she started to cry. But they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of anger and indignation. She told me I was losing my mind, that I was a confused old woman who couldn't keep track of her own finances, that it was insulting and hurtful that I would accuse her of stealing. She said she'd been nothing but kind to me, that she visited me more than she visited her own mother, that she'd given up her time and energy to make sure I was comfortable and safe. Her voice rose higher and higher until she was nearly shouting, and I stood there in my own living room feeling small and uncertain. She grabbed her purse and her shoes and stormed out, slamming the door so hard that the picture frames on the wall rattled. That night, when Robert came home from work, Amanda had already told him her version of the story. He came to see me with his face set in hard lines, disappointment radiating from him like heat. He told me that I'd hurt Amanda deeply, that I'd accused her of something terrible without any real proof, that my record-keeping was the confused scribbling of an elderly woman who couldn't accept that she was losing track of things. He said the stress of caring for me was taking a toll on their marriage, that maybe it was time to consider other living arrangements, perhaps a nice assisted living facility where professionals could keep track of my finances and my medications. The words felt like knives sliding between my ribs. My own son, my beautiful boy who I'd raised alone after his father died, was suggesting I be sent away because his wife had convinced him I was losing my mind. I didn't argue with him that night. I simply nodded and said I understood, that I was sorry for causing trouble, that I loved him more than anything in the world. After he left, I sat in my chair by the window and cried until my chest ached and my eyes were swollen. But I didn't give up. I called the bank the next morning, my fingers fumbling with the phone buttons, and I asked to speak with a manager. I explained my situation, told them I suspected someone was accessing my account without permission, and asked if there was any way to see video footage or transaction records. The manager, a kind young woman named Patricia, told me they could review everything and that they took elder financial abuse very seriously. It took 3 weeks. 3 long weeks during which Amanda didn't visit, during which Robert's calls became shorter and more distant, during which I sat in my chair and wondered if I was wrong, if maybe I really was just a confused old woman seeing patterns that didn't exist. But then Patricia called me and asked if I could come to the bank with a trusted family member or friend. I called my younger sister Margaret, who drove 2 hours from her home to be with me. We sat in a small office at the bank while Patricia showed us security footage and transaction records. There was Amanda, clear as day on the video, using my debit card at various ATMs around town. There were the checks she'd forged with my signature, made out to herself or to cash. The total amount was staggering, over $9,000 over the course of 18 months. Margaret held my hand while Patricia explained that the bank would refund the fraudulent transactions and that I should consider pressing charges. I felt numb, hollow, as if someone had scooped out everything inside me and left only an empty shell. This was my son's wife. This was the woman who called me Mom, who I'd welcomed into my family, who I'd trusted. I asked Patricia to prepare a full report of everything, every transaction, every forged check, every video. I asked for copies of it all. Then Margaret drove me home, and we sat at my kitchen table drinking tea while I decided what to do. I called Robert that evening and asked him to come by the next day with Amanda. My voice must have carried something he recognized because he agreed without argument. They arrived on a Saturday morning when the sun was streaming through my windows, making everything look clean and bright and hopeful. Amanda looked nervous, her smile forced, her hands fidgeting with her purse. Robert looked tired, dark circles under his eyes, his shoulders slumped. I asked them to sit down, and I placed the folder from the bank on the coffee table between us. I told them everything. I showed them the evidence, piece by piece, transaction by transaction. I watched Amanda's face cycle through emotions, shock, denial, anger, and finally a kind of desperate pleading. She tried to explain it away, said she'd been planning to pay it back, said she'd been in a dark place financially, said she never meant to hurt me. But Robert wasn't looking at her. He was looking at the papers spread across the table, at the video stills showing his wife at ATMs, at the forged checks bearing a signature that was almost but not quite mine. His face had gone pale, his hands clenched into fists on his knees. When Amanda finally stopped talking, the room fell silent except for the ticking of my old clock. Then Robert stood up slowly, like a man who'd aged 20 years in 20 minutes, and he asked Amanda to leave. She started to protest, reaching for his arm, but he pulled away from her touch as if she'd burned him. He told her to go, and after a moment of stunned silence, she grabbed her purse and ran out of the house. I heard her car start, heard the screech of tires as she drove away too fast down the quiet suburban street. Robert collapsed back onto the sofa and put his head in his hands. I watched my son cry for the first time since his father's funeral, and my heart broke all over again, but this time for him instead of for myself. He apologized over and over, said he should have believed me, should have listened, should have known better. I moved slowly across the room and sat beside him, put my thin arm around his broad shoulders, and told him that love makes us blind sometimes, that he'd wanted to believe the best in his wife, that there was no shame in that. We sat together while the afternoon light faded, and he told me about his marriage, about the cracks that had been forming long before this, about the lies and the debts and the person Amanda had become or maybe always was beneath the surface. The divorce took almost a year. Robert moved back into my house, sleeping in his old childhood bedroom with its faded wallpaper and the model airplanes still hanging from the ceiling. We ate dinner together every night, and slowly he began to heal. Amanda fought the divorce initially, tried to claim she was entitled to half of everything, but when Robert's lawyer mentioned the evidence of financial elder abuse and the possibility of criminal charges, she settled quickly and disappeared from our lives. The bank refunded most of the stolen money, though some of it was gone forever, spent on things I'd never know about. Now, 2 years later, I still sit in my chair by the window watching the neighborhood children play. My hands still shake, my eyes still need thick glasses, but something inside me feels stronger than it did before. I learned that weakness, the kind of weakness that comes with age, with needing help, with being vulnerable, doesn't mean you're helpless. I learned that paying attention matters, that trusting your instincts matters, that documenting the truth can save you even when everyone around you believes you're losing your mind. Robert met someone new recently, a kind nurse named Sarah who brings me flowers and sits with me sometimes to talk about books and recipes and life. She looks at me when she speaks, really looks, sees me as a person and not just an obstacle or a burden. I don't know how much time I have left in this world. Maybe a few years, maybe more if I'm lucky. But I know this. I will not spend whatever time remains doubting myself or being small or accepting mistreatment because I'm old and supposedly too weak to notice. Amanda was wrong about that. I noticed everything. And in the end, the truth that I counted so carefully, dollar by dollar, day by day, was what saved us both, my son from a marriage built on lies, and me from losing the trust and love of the person who matters most. Sometimes justice comes slowly, arrives in the form of bank statements and security footage and the quiet determination of an old woman who refused to let her story be written by someone else. I am 83 years old, and I am still here, still watching, still remembering. And I will not be dismissed.